Hello everyone, welcome to the European Integration course. Today, we will continue with Chapter 3, Legal and Institutional Integration of the European Union. In this chapter, we will first talk about the significance of a common legal order in the establishment of the European Union, and then the institutional structure of the European Union, the competencies of the European Union, distinctive features and the nature of European Union, legal orders and relations between the European Union legal order and national legal orders. Let's start with the significance of a common legal order in the establishment of the European Union. European Union was founded with a view to establish, promote, and maintain peace and prosperity in Europe after World War II. The founding states were Belgium, the Federal Republic of Germany, France, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. On the 1st of January 1973, Denmark, Ireland, and the United Kingdom acceded to the communities. However, the UK decided to leave the European Union with the Brexit referendum in 2016, but both the date and the legal arrangements have become uncertain, and the European Union has 28 members for the time being. Apart from enlargement, which is called widening, the powers and competencies of the European Union have evolved from merely aiming to establish a common market between its member states, where the goods, services, capital, and persons move freely without borders, to forming a union whose ultimate aim is to establish an economic and political unification amongst its member states and their peoples. The role of law and legal mechanisms and their interactions have been unprecedented and decisive in the creation of this so-called ever-closer union. Today, the legal order created by the European Union composes a significant portion of the political, social, and economic legislation of the member states, which have a profound effect on everyday lives of their citizens as well. Let's have a look at the institutional structure of the European Union. According to Article 13 of the Treaty on European Union, the Union shall have an institutional framework which shall aim to promote its values, advance its objectives, serve its interests, those of its citizens and those of the member states, and ensure the consistency, effectiveness, and continuity of its policies and actions. These institutions exercise the legislative, executive, and judicial functions at the European Union level. Therefore, the institutions exercise powers resembling the sovereign powers in a nation-state. The institutional structure of the Union is informed also by the structural principle of the European integration, that is, the principle of limited or conferred powers. There is a system of checks and balances in the institutional structure where the institutions are politically, administratively, and judicially controlled by each other in the exercise of their functions and performance of their duties. The institutions represent the values and interests of the member states and the citizens of the Union, as well as the Union itself. Let's move on to the competencies or powers of the EU. Principles and categories. The European Union is established in order to perform certain activities, certain tasks, and attain certain objectives. As provided in Article 1 of the Treaty on European Union, the member states established a union amongst themselves, on which they have transferred or conferred some of their competencies to attain objectives they have in common. The powers necessary to perform those tasks and attain those objectives have been transferred to the Union by the member states either at the beginning of the integration process or later with the amending treaties. In those areas that are left to the powers of the Union, there are different categories under which the Union can exercise those powers. The principles governing the powers of the European Union are regulated in Article 5 of the Treaty on European Union. This provision states that the limits of Union competencies are governed by the principle of conferral. The use of Union competencies is governed by the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality. In that regard, we can conclude that there are three principles governing the powers of the European Union. The first is the principle of conferral, dealing with the question whether the European Union has the power to regulate a certain policy area or not. The second and third principles relate to the exercise of the already existing powers of the EU, and they are called the principle of subsidiarity and the principle of proportionality. Now we can move on to the sources of European Union law. The sources of European Union law can be divided into two as primary sources and secondary sources. Primary sources consist of the international agreements entered into by the member states for the purpose of establishing the Constitution of the European Union. The European Union treaties prescribe the powers of the EU institutions to promulgate secondary legislation. Secondary sources are measures enacted by the EU institutions exercising the authority vested in them by the EU treaties. Naturally, primary sources of European Union law prevail over secondary sources in the event of a conflict. The secondary sources are the acts of the EU institutions deriving from the treaties, such as regulations, directives, decisions, opinions, and recommendations, and also international agreements signed by both the European Union and its member states, where the other party is either a third state or an international organization. Our last topic for today is the distinctive features and the nature of EU legal order and relations between the EU legal order and national legal orders. The European Union constitutes a new legal order which is based on international law and contains features of national laws of its member states and still exhibits fundamentally different qualities from both. This feature of European Union law is particularly apparent from the mechanism designed for the implementation and enforcement of such law and the rights and the role conferred on the individuals thereof in the national legal orders of its member states. The founding treaties consist of the substantive aspects of the integration together with the legal basis of the methods and mechanisms for the use of the competence transferred on EU institutions in order to take legislative, executive, and judicial action to achieve those mainly economic, substantive objectives. However, the task of implementing the body of law thus created and the individual's rights which derive thereof, where mainly belong to the national authorities and to be implemented and enforced in the national legal orders according to the domestic rules and procedures of each member state. European Union law, national law relations consist of two different aspects. On the one hand, these two different legal orders cooperate in the realization of the objectives of integration. Therefore, national legislative, executive, and judicial branches and the rules and procedures of the national legal order assist the European Union for the achievement of its tasks and aims. Enforcement of European Union law through national law is the main example of such cooperation. So, this is the end of our program for Chapter 3 of the European Integration course. Goodbye and see you in our next program, Chapter 4.